Welcome back, everyone, to the Shock Absorber podcast. It is wonderful to have you along with us, and it is wonderful to welcome us back onto the airwaves. Tim, welcome back.
Thank you.
It's been a few weeks off.
It has been a few weeks off, yes.
Well, what have you been doing?
Well,
that's the question, isn't it?
I've been here at Sorrow Bible Church working, unlike other co-hosts. But yeah, I've been writing sermons. Actually, I wrote a chapter of a book.
Did you?
Yeah, so new little preview. There's a teaser perhaps, of a new book coming out by Growing Faith, which is an imprint of YouthWorks Media. So I contributed to a book 2 years ago, Parenting in God's Family, I think it was called. There's a chapter I've got in there about being fathers and fatherhood. And so they're doing a volume 2. Oh. So I'm contributing a chapter on why your family needs the intergenerational church.
Really? Does that mean there is a book in the works, a second book in the works, as we kind of hinted at the other week?
Oh, not my own personal book. This is just me contributing a chapter. So I did do that last week. So that was helpful. Was
that a good process?
I enjoy. I stole this from someone else. I enjoy having written. As in, I like at the other end looking at the chapter going, I wrote that. Yeah. I'm really proud of that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It's like when you're doing the vacuuming.
That's right. That's right. You look at the clean house
or you mow the lawn.
The mow the lawn. Yeah. The clean lawn. Yeah. Or the neat lawn. Yes. So I do enjoy it. It is good. But it is a process and it is a bit of a slog, and to train myself, and I sort of have to really get into put the phone away, turn the internet off, sit by myself and just kind of write. Yeah. So it does take a while to detangle my mind from all the other inputs and actually commit myself to doing it. But it's good. I have Cal Newport in my head telling me to do deep work. So that's good.
That's cool. It is. I think that's almost, if you can get to the deep work point, and I know we talked about this a while ago, or a very recent episode, but if you can get to the deep work point, that's almost like the part of, mowing the lawn or finishing the book, or even if you can get that, there is something. Yeah. It feels rewarding to just at least spend some time in deep work.
Absolutely. Yeah. What have you been doing, Joel?
Well, I haven't been working, as you pointed out. I really only missed 1 week, but we went away to regional New South Wales tour.
Oh, lovely.
So my daughter turned 5 in August. And we said part of her present was that we would go to Dubbo Zoo.
Oh, I love Dubbo Zoo.
Western Plains Zoo, or Taronga Western Plains Zoo, as they like to be called. And it is really nice. So we went there, and on the way we stopped in Orange for 2 nights. We drove, stopped in Orange for 2 nights, met up with our friends, good friends that you know, of course, Tom and Julie, who live out there now. And then we went to Dubbo, stayed at Dubbo Zoo for a night. And
you did the overnight out at the zoo?
We did.
Yeah. How was it?
Look, it's not the most salubrious.
Is the little, they've got sort of permanent tent set up.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
The Billabong camp.
Okay,
There's a couple of other places you can stay, but we went with the Billabong camp.
Yes, before kids, Roz and I stayed at the only option at the time, which was the kind of the resorty thing.
Yes.
So we did that for an anniversary trip in one of our early years of marriage.
So did you have a real bed?
We had a real bed. Yeah.
We slept on a camp bed.
Yeah, no, this was real bed, real food.
So the reason I sound a little bit disappointed was not with actually going to I'd had a couple of rough nights sleep before. I'm not a good sleeper, like in terms of, especially if I'm in a different place, and I wake up very easily.
Yeah, right.
So the weird thing about the Billabong camp was it was cool. Like I was looking forward to sleeping in a tent and everything, but the camp bed was reasonably uncomfortable.
Okay.
I expect that. But also it's really close to the major highway into Dubbo.
Oh, sure.
So really, I think what I got woken up by most was trucks driving past.
Yes, okay.
Even though that was probably like 500 meters away or something. That was the thing that woke me up.
Close enough, yeah. When you stay at the Billabong camp, do you get the after hours tour?
Yes, and that was the best part of it.
Yeah, that is
at night?
Yes.
So they give you a red light torch. Well, no, they don't give you that. They have people with red light torches because the animal's eyes aren't able to depict red light.
Okay.
So you don't bother them, but you get to see them.
Yes.
At night.
Yeah.
So we got to see. It was really fun to see like echidnas, especially like waddling around doing their thing because they're obviously nocturnal. Quokkas as well.
Oh, yes.
And there was another animal that I'm forgetting at the time. There's kangaroos everywhere. And there's kangaroos everywhere on the road that met their demise on the road. But that was one of the cool things is the keeper talks that you got to have.
Yes.
Kind of separate to everyone else that would go to the zoo as normal.
Yep.
So that was really fun, and the kids really enjoyed that too.
Yeah.
So we stayed the night. We did that. We had a keeper talk in the afternoon with the lion, and then after dinner we went for another walk at night. We had the torches, and then the next day we went and did our own thing around the whole zoo as well. And the best thing was like the kids had their bikes, and my wife and I were just walking, and they had the bikes, and it was the best way to experience the zoo. It was really, really fun, so I really enjoyed it. Yep.
It was really good.
Yep. I went to Mudgee. Mudgee has a lot of good bike paths.
Okay. I don't recall ever having stopped at Mudgee. I'm sure I have, but there's not.
I'd only been once before to go visit wineries.
Okay.
But it's a nice town. I like Mudgee.
Yeah, good.
It was cool. So that's what we did. And now, just before we get onto this, I was going to say we're going to talk about what we're preaching on, because you and I are preaching on the same thing this weekend.
We are.
Well, this will come out after the weekend. But before we did that, I got on. We were talking about the re-emergence of walking. I don't know if it's really a re-emergence of walking. But
a rediscovery of an ancient art. You've got these two legs. They could move.
We don't have to be sitting down all the time.
Yeah. Actually, there's as a brief aside, so at our local Westfield here at Miranda, there's one of those little pop-up stores in the middle of the walkway. And it's got these kind of very space-agey type massage chairs. And it looks exactly like, in WALL-E, where all the humans are living on the spaceship and they've just got their little floating chairs and they don't have to do anything, and they're all overweight and they're all floated because they don't have to do anything. And they look exactly like that. And I get a lot of humour out of that, because I'm just like, I think you've taken the wrong idea from WALL-E. That was not the optimal future that we are aspiring towards, but it looks like this company has gone, oh, look at those chairs, they look great. So they've made the WALL-E chairs. I don't think they float, but they look very space-agey.
It have to be like that maglev kind of stuff. Have you seen about that? Like maglev trains, they actually levitate.
Oh yes, yeah.
I think there's a number of them in China where the magnets are so strong that that's what makes the train go so fast. Is that they're pulling of the magnets?
Yeah, so there's no friction.
Yeah. What an unreal concept that is.
Yeah. But back to walking. Yeah.
Well,
I did some walking on Wednesday, actually.
Did you?
Yes, we went to the Blue Mountains as a family and walked around Govett's Leap, which is not named after someone who took a leap off the cliff, which is, I've always thought that was what Govett's Leap was.
Well, the name would make you think that.
Well, that's right. But no, Mr. Govett, I think that was, I actually can't remember. But a leap is actually the name of the waterfall, which I discovered.
Really?
Yeah.
And so how long was the walk?
I was aspirational.
Always good to be.
Yeah. On the website, it said that there was a 7 kilometre, 2.5 hour walk to a place called Pulpit Rock.
Yep.
And I thought, that sounds very achievable. We had all day. So I thought, let's try that. We got there and there was bushfire damage to the track, and so some parts of the track were closed. But in the end, we only walked for about 2 hours along the track, and we were absolutely done. Like it was so many ups and downs and stairs and we were exhausted.
Oh, sounds like you need a floating chair.
I need a floating chair, a floating massage chair. But it was great. It was lovely to be out in the bush. I just love being out in the bush.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that. It is cool, isn't it? It's good to be able to walk and spend some time in God's creation that way, because it was. I know that Dubbo Zoo wasn't God's creation.
Well, you're experiencing a lot of God's creativity.
That's it.
Yeah.
But it was just
in a concentrated form.
Right. And the kids being on the bike and being able to walk around, it was just, there's something special about that.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. And you going on a bushwalk. So during COVID, because you know how you weren't allowed out of your particular LGA.
Yes, your local government area, and our local government area includes the Royal National Park.
That's right. And so we took a lot of walks at the Royal National Park.
Yeah, that was a nice little bonus for living where we are in the world.
But admittedly, it was a really nice time to spend with the family.
Yes.
And we had lots of great conversations. And relatively recently in the national park, they've redone some of the trails.
Ah, right.
And one of the things that they do is this suspended walkways.
Okay.
And so for me, who's someone who likes progress, likes seeing the finished result, as we talked about with mowing the lawn, for example, you can make lots of progress, but enjoy the area. You're not trampling through bush either, so you're kind of raised above it.
Yeah, yep.
But you're going along the coast, so you've got this beautiful outlook across the coast. It's flat because it's all on these new platforms that they've installed. But you can make lots of progress as well. And it was one of the most enjoyable things I did during COVID.
There you go.
So all the way out to, wherever it is, I can't remember. There's like Eagle Rock and places like that.
I don't think I've actually been out that way.
So we did it in sections.
Okay.
So we've done it all the way to Otford, but did it in sections because you can do it all in one go.
Yes.
Some of my friends actually ran it the other weekend.
Oh, right.
You're crazy. They're practicing for a big long run. But that was what was cool about it. And then as a result, because I'm not, and it could be just my personality, but not worrying about, this is hard getting up and down hills and stuff. I can enjoy what the walk encompasses.
Yeah.
God's creation, as we said. Anyway, you were saying, though, that Ryan Holiday got you thinking about walking. Was that right?
Yes, there was a video. I only saw it recently. It may be an old video. You don't know how the YouTube algorithm works, but just talking about the importance of walking and as a thinking exercise, as in that going out and walking without input, and that's the trick for me, is not having input going, because I usually have a podcast or something I'm listening to. But it's quite clarifying for the mind. And so I'm trying to start to implement a bit more of that as a discipline. Partly a spiritual discipline, as in, like, I want to spend some time and praying. So I did that during the week, actually. I did a number of hours of work on sermon prep, and we'll get to talking about sermon in a minute. Lots of reading and making notes. And then it was kind of time for me to transition from sermon prep to administrative stuff. And I thought, actually, as part of that shift was to, ate a quick lunch, but then did go for a kilometre or so walk just around the block here at Miranda, and very consciously didn't take anything with me, didn't listen to anything, but also spent some of that time just praying through what I've been preparing, praying that it will be fruitful and beneficial for me, for the congregation as I preach to them, that will communicate clearly, all of those kinds of things. So just kind of bringing all of that preparation that I had done to God as part of that walk. And I just, it was really lovely. It was quite refreshing, and something that I want to try and build in more regularly into my sermon prep, into my just general life, is to do those kinds of things. And being able to, I think there's that, I've heard, even the secular thinkers talk about it, so like Ryan Holiday, and I think Cal Newport talked about it as well. But there's this, the connection between the physiological of moving your body and the psychological mental task of processing ideas, or praying through something or talking through something, and just how significant that can be in terms of clarifying your own thinking and making progress on whatever it is you're trying to work through at the time. And so, yes, just trying to be aware of that, which, again, as we kind of often bring back to ideas of what it means to be God's creation, to be embodied beings the way God has made us to be. It's no surprise that, God has made us as holistic beings that are psychological and mental and physical. And so therefore, it ought not surprise us that when you put those things together, it's actually beneficial for you, because that's how God has designed us to be. So, so I've found that quite helpful. I
believe I've heard a story about Kierkegaard, the philosopher.
Yes.
Is that where you got it from?
I have heard of this story through a number of different places. Yeah. So the idea that he would basically write for 4 hours and then walk for 4 hours, and that was that was his day.
Just walk around the streets of Copenhagen thinking through ideas.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. That's kind of cool.
It is. I mean, that's a lot of thinking. 4 hours.
Well, here's a quote from Kierkegaard. I've walked myself into my best thoughts.
Yeah.
There you go. So, but there's something special about walking, isn't there? I don't know what it is, but you're moving, like you said, the physiological thing, but also it puts your body in a different state to be able to think differently instead of just sitting down and like, hey, I can't figure this out.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I think a key part of it is that lack of input in order to have space for your own thoughts. And also for me, I fall asleep very easily. So
damn it.
if I try to sit in a room and think about something, I'd be asleep within about 5 minutes. So
right,
actually walking to think about something is also.
I'm very jealous of you. The worst is the thing. I have this thing with like I fall asleep and then I get woken up as I'm falling asleep and then I stay awake for a long time.
Oh
like,
yeah,
what
it's frustrating.
is this?
Yeah,
so frustrating. Anyway, the reason that I was saying that you got that idea from Ryan Holiday, which I'm sure I've heard. That's who I heard the Kierkegaard quote from.
Quite likely, yeah.
Was he was on another podcast we've talked about a lot, is Modern Wisdom podcast.
Oh yes, Chris Williamson. Yep, that one.
He was going through his own health struggles as well. He released a video on that too.
Oh really?
Yeah, mold related and stuff. The place that he moved to in Austin had a lot of hidden mold.
Okay,
and it's causing him a lot of health issues.
That's
anyway,
no good.
No, and I always enjoy Ryan's work. A lot of time, just the space and the kind of step back perspective he gives on certain things. But it was really interesting hearing him talk about on this podcast, and I really enjoyed the whole episode. But talking about the banning of books, especially. Now, I've been interested on your opinion of banning of books, which I'm going to guess what it is. But to hear what he was saying was that, so he went to speak. He always speaks at the Naval Academy.
Yeah, he's had a long relationship with them. Yep.
He has, and so I think he's written 4 books in a series now. And every time he's gone and spoken at the Naval Academy. So the Naval Academy is kind of like West Point for the Army. It's like the best and the brightest of the Navy. They're going to be commanding ships in war and piloting fighter planes and all that kind of thing. So apparently what's happened in the latest Trump administration is they have started removing some books from the library. And when he sent in his slides for his latest talk, it actually included stuff on that. And they said, we want you to remove that. And as a result, he said, I'm not going to remove that because I don't agree with the removal of books from any library or any place. So I'm not going to do the talk. So it became a bit of a brouhaha, as you've used that term recently. Was that just before we started recording? I think it was. But it was just interesting the way that he articulated afterwards his argument. So he used an example of a fighter pilot who I believe studied at the Naval Academy and then was a fighter pilot in the Korean War. That's what we should call it. He got shot down over North Korea. Now, one of the things that he was encouraged at the Naval Academy was to read Marxist books and to understand the Marxist perspective. And so he gets shot down in communist North Korea, gets captured, and then he says that the pilot was able to understand what the North Koreans were doing, but also that he could outthink them because he knew that he thinks he understood Marxism better than they did. And he's got this idea of reading, what was the quote? Reading behind enemy lines.
Okay.
So basically you understand the perspective of your enemies or the people that have a different perspective, and therefore you can have a more nuanced perspective and a more nuanced argument and then you're more likely to win people over to your argument. And I thought that was really fascinating as we kind of start looking at our sermon preparation and ideas that we thought we might make the bulk of this episode. But do you want to speak about that first? I mean, the banning of books thing, to me, there may be plenty of books that I disagree with, but I don't think I agree with getting rid of books because I have a great love for books and I have my mum to thank for that, of instilling a great love for books. Is that the same way that you think? Do you think that banning books seems a long way from saying you probably shouldn't read those books as well? What are your thoughts? Yeah,
I think they are very different things. A couple of different thoughts. I mean, the flat out banning of books I don't think is wise, generally speaking. Partly because of what you said. I think that having open access to even very bad ideas is good for a thinking person to engage with ideas and ideas you disagree with, and to think, I don't agree with this author or this perspective, why not? And to sort of think through that idea. And so there can be value in a field you're particularly interested in, looking into views that intentionally contradict your own. And part of this is just there's way too much information out there than you can ever, be aware of and consume. Yeah. And so, you personally are only ever going to read 0.0001% of all books out there. So you're not going to read the majority of the stuff that's out there. So I think there's two things here. One is I don't think we should be scared of views we disagree with.
Yep.
And I think we should be open to reading those kinds of things. On the other hand, there's also, I've got limited time in my life. And so therefore, there's a whole lot of things that's probably just not worth my time reading. So, in my particular interests of Christianity and Jesus and biblical studies, as well as, psychology and philosophy and sociology, those kinds of bits and pieces. I mean, I could spend a lot of time getting to know the mystical Jesus topic, which is this whole idea that Jesus either didn't really exist or he kind of existed, or the historic Jesus is different from the what do they call the Jesus of history is different to the Christ of faith, and that Jesus himself didn't believe that he was God, but Paul and other people came and attributed to this man Jesus this theology of Christ, which they got from the Old Testament and applied to Jesus in ways that Jesus didn't understand himself to be. It's the whole world, right?
Right.
Now that's about the extent of my knowledge on it. I could spend a lot of my time reading up on that because it's a view I disagree with, so that I know it well, or I could just read really good books on other things. So in terms of, what am I trying to say? I don't think that banning books is a helpful process, partly because I don't trust, there's a good inherent distrust of authorities, as in the person who has the power to ban books may also have the power to ban books that you like.
Yes.
And so I think there's a healthy distrust of authorities. A helpful way of saying that is, I truly believe that everyone is sinful and will make mistakes. And so part of not banning books is we're allowing open for the fact that if we give someone the power to ban books, are they going to make the right decision 100% of the time?
Right.
So I think that's a helpful thing. I do think that there's a difference between banning books and saying, and not recommending books, or saying, look, I don't think it's helpful for you to read this.
Yeah.
That might be an age thing. There might be ideas that are too complex for younger people, and it is worth waiting until they are older to wrestle with particularly complex ideas. I do think that ideas shape how we think. And so I think as someone who is, has an armchair interest in child development and adolescent development, to think through what ideas are we putting into their minds, because it will shape what they think about reality and ultimate things. And so, one of the interesting things we've noticed over the last, 20, 30 years maybe, is this sort of revisaging of baddies in the classical sense into just misunderstood. So you've got the story of you've got Maleficent, and you've got the story of what's the 101 Dalmatians baddie, Cruella de Vil. You've got the Cruella movie, you've got a Maleficent movie, you've got Wicked, trying to reimagine the Wicked. And so all of these characters, so the classic children's literature is there's good and there's bad, go with the good, be wary of the bad. And so you have Hansel and Gretel, you've got the wolf, you've got all these kind of classic children's stories, which intentionally use this kind of archetypal type language of darkness and light, goodies and baddies, very clear delineation. And so you grow up with a particular mental framework and a moral framework of thinking that there's these good and bad categories. Now, we know that as we grow older, things are much more complex than black and white, goodies and baddies. But I think that there's a sense in which children need to learn the bold concepts, and you learn to grow into nuance. Whereas by rewriting the children's stories and then repitching them to children, you're actually confusing these categories, which in their developing brain are not yet ready for nuance. They need clarity first and nuance later. And so that's a very basic example. So I do think there's things that we need to be very careful of. A lot of the talk about banning books is about LGBTI stuff as well. And so again, a lot of this is being pushed in the children's world. So it's not should we ban LGBTI books full stop, but do they have a place in school libraries or in those kinds of things? And I think that is also there. You can have a nuanced position that talks about we're not banning this book, but we are saying that for particular developmental stages and particular age groups, perhaps they need to learn more of the foundations before you start talking about the nuancing of different ideas. So I do think that's a different thing as well. The other thing I just put in, and the idea of this might not be a good book to read. I think we all need to be aware of our own temptations to things that are unhelpful or helpful for us personally to read. So if you're someone who is particularly sensitive to violence or horror and horror themes, if you're particularly sensitive to that, then you probably shouldn't read most Stephen King books. We shouldn't ban Stephen King books, and you can be a Christian and read Stephen King books and you can enjoy them as literature. But if you are a particularly sensitive person, you don't have a responsibility to read Stephen King. You don't have to read it. You need to be wise in that as well. And obviously the same goes with sensuality, sexuality, the big rise at the moment of romantasy, like that sort of mix of fantasy and romance is massive at the moment. That's the whole book talk thing is massive. And so there's all these, what if Lord of the Rings had a whole lot of quite pornographic scenes in them, and then we write that book, and that's a massive industry at the moment. And again, I think we need to be wise. So I wouldn't be a fan of banning those things, but I would be certainly cautioning against anyone reading them, and then certainly younger people or people who are particularly sensitive to those things from reading. So I think that there's somewhere in that messy, nuanced, idea is kind of where I kind of land with those kinds of ideas.
Well, it's a nuanced answer to a question, I think, is what you're saying. It needs to be nuanced. It can't be like, get rid of this book.
And I've said this before on the podcast, like complexity, I enjoy complexity, and therefore I enjoy nuance. And I think that blunt answers are usually unhelpful. I'll say that as a blunt statement.
That makes a lot of sense, because I think one of the things that I was thinking about was that you kind of said there's a lot of new ideas with books, but it's almost like how we frame the ideas is really where the nuance can be played out in lots of different ages. You were talking about different ages. So I think that's an important thing to think about, because I was thinking even with my children about what they're reading and how they develop the ideas from reading. I read a princess's book to my 5-year-old daughter, not last night, the night before. I was like, this is a little bit like princesses get to do this. And I think I might have been even just reading too much into it. But it was like, these are pretty like bluntly stated ideas of that what princes and princesses, like apparently princes are all good dancers.
Princes?
Yeah.
What do you know? How did you know?
I didn't know that, but there you go. I'm like, that's not a good picture to put in my daughter's mind. They're not all good dancers, surely. But
again, I think that's the like classic children's literature, like the sort of the fairy tales, the grim storytelling, like all of those kinds of things, are intentionally tropes and archetypes, and they are black and white in their thinking, And that's intentional. Like there's actually a purpose there. And part of the problem with children's literature in this postmodern moment is that postmodernism deconstructs everything and says there is no meaning, there is no truth. Everything's just a matter of perspective. So they bring that complexity into even books for very young children, and their children grow up to be quite confused because they don't have the capacity, they haven't built up the foundation of archetype on which complexity needs to be built.
Okay.
So when we deconstruct children's literature and then we repackage it back to children, and we tell children that, there's no really such thing as a baddie. It's just everyone's just misunderstood. And then they go through life, they don't have these clear categories on which complexity is built. So I think that can be problematic as well.
That's a good point. Because, the reason I asked you the question, I've been thinking about it, is because just before we were recording, you were reading some of the research you were looking at for your sermon preparation. And there was a view in there, I'm like, almost like a fear for me of like, am I going to be won over by this kind of contradicting thought?
Oh, right.
Which is quite interesting that I don't know why I have that fear, because with most stuff that doesn't happen. So I want maybe it's a fear that my faith isn't strong enough. Not 100% sure, but maybe that's the case. But that's why I was thinking about it, because it could mean I've missed something. That's probably what it is. I've missed something, and I'm not knowledgeable enough in that. And I think maybe also plays into my fears of, we can get into this. We're both preaching on the start of 1 Peter this weekend, and how it's the second time ever I've preached a sermon. So you very helpfully said, it's a skill you're acquiring. And I think when you suggested that maybe we talk about it, one of my other fears was, what if like Tim, like your background in children's ministry, I think influences how you preach sermons, and I really appreciate that. Like I really enjoy there's some difference in that. So I'm like being silly and comparative and going, like I've only preached 2 and Tim's preached heaps more than me. But is mine going to be as good? Of course it's not going to be as good, because like it's a skill like you're acquiring. So I suppose it's my rooted in my fear. But let's talk about like how we actually are going to start 1 Peter. You read a lot of commentaries and different thoughts on it. I have found that I need to start reading the passage, and sometimes I'm more tempted to. I'm not saying you're not doing that, by the way, but I find that I'm more tempted to go and find a good illustration, or something like that first, rather than like, what is the passage actually saying, and then have an illustration. Because I did, but I think it was also a bit of a procrastination thing of like, let me look through some of the books that I have and the notes that I've taken before. Maybe this might apply to the thing that I want to pull out of this sermon. So do you start obviously by reading the passage, I think, but also are you reading lots of different perspectives on it?
Maybe it depends on the time that I've got. You always start with the passage. And so, some of our listeners might be familiar with the YouthWorks camp LIT, where we train older high school kids. And one of the things we intentionally train them is how to read the Bible. And so we have this particular tool called the teaching target.
Okay.
Where you start with the passage, and so you just read the passage, and you read it, and you read it, and you read it, and you read it. And I think for particularly something as small as 1 Peter, reading 1 Peter through a number of times, like probably about 15, 20 minutes worth. So you could read it every day.
It's 105 verses.
There you go, 105 verses. So it doesn't take a lot of time just to read 1 Peter. So I'd be reading 1 Peter through and through, and then reading. We're doing chapter 1 verses 1 to 12.
Yep.
So read that through a number of times. Yep. Then you're thinking about, okay, what's the context? So for the passage, so this is at the start of the book. So it's the introduction.
Yeah.
So that's going to tell me something about how to understand this part. It's his introductory thoughts. So what does he do at the start? So you're looking there. You're looking at the structure of the passage. So you're looking for the connecting words, the the buts, the therefores, the ands, where the paragraph breaks. Being aware that some of the paragraph and even some of the sentence breaks are put in there by translators, not in the original text. So sometimes if you really want to go deep, you'd be looking at least 2 or 3 different versions. And I like to look at sort of a technical, a semi-technical, and even a paraphrase type one.
Oh, okay.
Just to sort of see what's going on and the choices that they're making.
I have not done this. This is a good tip.
Yeah. So for a more technical one, like ESV is quite a strict word for word technical one. The NIV, which is what we actually preach from at church, is quite a good middling one in terms of technicality. It does very well. And then something like the Message or something which is paraphrase, very intentionally so, but what Peterson is trying to do is trying to get to sort of a heart affective type understanding of a passage rather than a literal word for word part of the passage. So if you understand what he's doing, it can be quite a helpful extra tool just to kind of read and go, okay, so I can see what's going on here. So obviously we're preaching from the NIV. That's the text that we're using in front of us, but just to see a variety. And then there's lots of other versions out there, and you go to bible.com, you've got 200 different English translations to choose from. So you're looking at those and just trying to understand. So then you're looking at, well, what's the big idea? What's the one, if I was to say one thing about these 12 verses, what would that be? What's the main thing he's trying to get across? So you try and pull that out. And you're trying, and this is why reading the text matters, because you're trying to let the text tell you what the main thing is.
It's God's word, right?
Yeah, rather than you having the idea first. Yeah. So this can be the danger of coming up with a clever story or a story from the news or a clever picture first, is because that will then shape the way you read the passage, and you will now read into the passage your very clever idea or story that you want to use, rather than letting the passage itself come out and let you know what it's trying to say. So prayerfully, reflectively, you're trying to work it out. If you're not sure, talking with others, those kinds of things as well. I mean, it's very helpful sometimes when during the week, Braden, Jai and I are often in the office together, and sometimes it's usual that at least 2 of us are preaching that weekend. And so we will at some point during the week kind of bat it around and say, I'm thinking about this. What are you thinking of? And that we have that
that's cool.
collegiality, which is really fun. And once you come up with a big idea, I think this is the one thing. If I was to say these 12 verses in 10 words, this is what I would say those 10 words is. And then what are some of the supporting ideas that he uses to bolster that? Then, okay, well, what was the application then is the second last part. So what does Peter actually want his readers to, how does he want them to apply that? And then the final part of the teaching target is, and so therefore, application now, recognising that we live in a very different cultural context 2,000 years later.
Yep.
So there will be a lot of similarity because God's word is God's word, and it's inspired by the Spirit, and it illuminates to us by God's Spirit. So there is a continuity there. But there may also be difference because we're not in first century Turkey, we're in 21st century Sydney. And so therefore there are things that are culturally contingent and have changed. And so once you've worked that out, then you've got a really good scaffold to say, okay, well, now I understand the passage. Now I need to work out how to preach that, which is a different skill. But in terms of understanding the actual passage, that's a really, really helpful framework to do that in.
So this is this episode is kind of talking about some preparation techniques and how I can learn from them. I like the idea of taking a few different translations and looking at them. I hadn't done that before, so that's a really good idea. So how do you want to do this? You want to talk about, I've kind of gone a bit more straight down the line, I think. I think that's what we were saying in terms of like what we're preaching about.
Yep.
And then you can speak into that because you said you've kind of taken more of a cultural or living in this cultural moment kind of perspective.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, this is, it's a hard, I always find first sermons in a series hard because I want to do 2 things. And I'm not, and I think what has happened is you've chosen one of the things and I've chosen the other of the things.
That's good.
Yeah. And so the 2 things are, well, firstly, you've got these 12 verses to exegete and explain. So what is Peter saying in these 12 verses? And so you've very much gone down that line, which I think is excellent. the other thing that I wrestle with in a first sermon series is but what's the whole picture of Peter?
Yes.
And what are we as a church hoping to get out of Peter this season? So what would actually be really great to have built into the series is a introductory. I often do this with kids curriculum actually. The first talk is not on a passage, it's about the idea.
Yeah.
And then you look at the passage. So in that balance between, am I exegeting these 12 verses or am I doing an overview of 1 Peter and what do we as a church hope to get out of this? As I said, you've gone with the let's exegete these 12 verses.
I've given a little bit of overview at the start though.
Yeah, and I think I've gone heavily into what is 1 Peter as a whole trying to say to us in this particular moment.
Yeah, okay.
Based on these 12 verses as the intro of what he's saying across the entire book. So, I mean, I will be looking at verses and those kinds of things. But I think I'm sort of doing the 30,000 foot view of Peter as a whole, and you've gone into the detail of what is he saying in these 12 verses. So I think the difference between the two will be quite enlightening.
Yeah, okay. So look, how I've started is I have just a very brief overview, contextual overview of why Peter's writing at that time, who he's writing it to. But I also went back to basically Peter is the one that denied Jesus 3 times. Jesus reinstates him. I think it's in John 21.
Yes.
And then is a pivotal figure in the early church. And I think that's a really interesting perspective. I don't talk too much about it, but I think that's a really interesting, the fact that 1 Peter is kind of written from that perspective, and also from the number of sermons he gives in Acts. I think there's 6 or 7 where he's preaching to Jews and Gentiles. Is like this picture of he is writing and or preaching to 2 different major groups of people. The fact that Jesus is risen and it doesn't just belong to you now. But then he's writing this letter to people in Asia Minor saying the same thing because they're scattered amongst it. But there's also this chance that he's probably evangelized to some of them during that time in Acts, which I thought was really quite fascinating. So there's this kind of connection of I have met some of you before, but I know what you're going through. And the thing that I see is you've been chosen. My kind of theme is you've been chosen, you were elect. Almost don't discount that. Remember who you are. And then he goes through some reasons why you are exiled because of that identity you have in Jesus. One of the things that I'm focusing on the most is the inheritance of the hope we have in heaven. And I'm trying to pull that out. And then as a result, there's kind of 3 implications that we get from that. One of them is that we get to share in the resurrecting power that God has. That we will suffer trials and tribulations and difficulties and struggles because of our identity in Jesus. And then the third point is the reason that we go through those trials is to prove the genuineness of our faith.
Yep.
Which I'd always thought about, had the refined by fire argument, which Peter delves into a little bit, was making you better. I also thought, I didn't realize that was a way of proving that your faith is genuine. But it makes sense. He's got to prove it's genuine before you can strengthen it. But I hadn't actually thought that. So this is one of the things I enjoy most, the fact that preparing for sermons, and it's only been the second time I've done it, is it's actually really shaping my relationship with God and my understanding of Him a lot more. I think that's what it is. The process can be a little bit stressful for me just because I'm working full-time in another job and stuff like that.
Yep.
But the stress is worth it because of this kind of opening my eyes to so much more.
And I think I was just picking up, this is just a small point, but that idea of the refined by fire and what is that actually doing? I think it's always good to, at the start, not draw other passages into this passage until we've understood this passage. So what can sometimes happen is we can go, I've elsewhere in the New Testament that talks about refining fire being a strengthener of faith. That must be what Peter's talking about here. But that realization of, well, no, Peter himself or other New Testament writers are very welcome to use the same analogy for different purposes in different books or different paragraphs even. And so, just to be able to slow down and go, but how is he using the metaphor here?
Yeah.
It's one about proving faith.
Yeah, good point.
So the proving the genuineness of the faith. So if you think about, again, this idea of refining gold, how do you know if this is really gold mixed with dirt and rock and other things? Well, you burn away and then you realize that there's pure gold. Whereas if the whole thing burnt away, you'd be like, there actually wasn't any gold there at all anyway. So the fire is proving that there is genuine gold in there by being that kind of refining fire.
I found, just in regards to that refining by fire, I found a quote by Richard Sibbes.
Right,
1600s, out of a different book that I have. And it says, "Alas, we lament, I shall never get through such a trial. But if God brings us into the trial, he will be with us in the trial, and at length bring us out more refined. We shall lose nothing but dross." And I thought, I'm not sure if I'm going to use that quote so much, but the fact is that we don't actually lose anything but the dross, which is the unpurified stuff that we don't, that's not actually required.
Yes.
I think that you're really helping me. I need to put that. I need to put that in the sermon somewhere because that's really cool. The other thing, like talking about, reading the text first, was at the start of 1 Peter, and in verses 1 to 2, it's interesting how I need to just find the verse, but he actually, and there's not a problem with this, but you know how you usually hear about this when you speak of the Trinity, it's Father, Son, Spirit.
Yep.
He actually reverses it or changes it in verse 2. He talks about Father first, then the Spirit, and then the Son.
Yep.
And I one of the commentaries I had looking at that was like, that's a really interesting highlight, and it emphasizes in the commentary to say this is why we should always go to the passage first and allow the passage to surprise us.
Yeah.
And not try and read into it, like you're saying, was that like there's nothing wrong with what he's saying at all, because this is obviously God's word, but there's something of like he's done that on purpose for a reason, to say that verse 2 I'll say is, "Who have been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father through the sanctifying work of the Spirit to be obedient to Jesus Christ and sprinkled with his blood." Now there he's not saying you need to be sanctified by the Spirit before you are obedient to Jesus, but he's changing it a little bit to say, I think that the obedience, and goes back into the proving the genuineness of your faith, is you continually being made more and more obedient by that. I don't know if you agree with that or disagree, but I thought that was an interesting way to say, hey, let's not just read our ideas into the passage itself.
Yeah, well, and again, so this is where the structure matters, like those connecting words. So we've been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father. So there's this settled decision by the Father. And then through, so you're thinking about the words that he's using. So through, how is it that we are chosen? What's the manner, what's the method, the process by which we are sanctified through the Spirit? And what's the end to which we are chosen and sanctified is obedience.
Yes.
So the trick with Trinitarian language is to realize that the different persons of the Trinity are working together but have different emphases and purposes. So it's one of the tricks of having to talk about the Trinity is that you can go too far into the distinctives and it almost sounds like they've got different wills, so that they're doing different things that they're kind of unaware of each other. Is that what you did? Oh, great. Let's have a team meeting to work out what Jesus did this week. And Spirit, report back on what you did. Like it's kind of like, it's not that. There's a single will of the Trinity, but the Bible does highlight different actions and things that they are doing in this whole salvation type thing. So that's helpful. So. You could easily see he could still say the same thing by putting Father, Son, Spirit in the same order. Why does he do that? What's his purpose? That's a good question to ask. It's not obvious. It's not clear, I don't think, but my hypothesis might be that whatever you put last is kind of the focus, tends to be when you read it through. Yeah. And so foreknowledge of God the Father, the sanctifying work of the Spirit. So what? What's the so what? What's the application point? How do we finish? Obedience to Jesus Christ. That seems to be it draws us into that end point.
I've kind of pulled that apart to a degree to show that your choosing, your election, is like a really powerful process, I think. So they're all doing different things, or they are doing different things, but they're all still one person, but three person. Three persons. I always find it so hard to describe the Trinity.
Three persons. Yep.
Three persons. That adds like a weightiness, I think, to the power. And I wrote it's like it's an unbreakable connection once you're chosen, like because you have been chosen by God, and that's forged by the Father, Son, and the Spirit, and that's why you've been chosen. So remember that. Remember that you are chosen by God through this really powerful and unstoppable force.
Yeah.
And then, so like I said, it goes on to the inheritance that we receive in heaven is because of the resurrection of Jesus. So there's this power element of the power that chose you, also resurrected, took all of our sin, past, present, and future, and then also resurrected Jesus at the same time, so that we can live in a new hope that we can look forward to. So that's where I'm trying to make that connection between like there's this powerful spiritual element. And it's a spiritual inheritance that we're getting. So then I go on, it's like, I think what Peter will eventually does across the entire book is say, because of these things, how must you live? And how must you live in a culture where he considers you exiles?
Yeah, yeah.
And the people that he's written to Asia Minor, he says they're exiles. So the language he uses is saying you are set apart. So you exile, I think he uses exiles, elect, chosen, scattered. I think there's another one. This is all in at least the first 12 verses of the book. So then it's about how do you live in light of the inheritance that you've got. So there's things about suffering. There's things about actually living in a way that actually is pleasing to God in obedience, as we said. I was going to ask you, what's the angle that you're going to take on that? One of the things I'm going to kind of focus a lot on the inheritance part. I think I've said that before. Because it's like, I think it might even just be a personal perspective. It's like, am I actually looking forward to that? I think sometimes I'm like, oh, but I've got things to do on earth still. So I'm wondering if maybe that's why I've gone down that road. But I'm wondering, you've been talking about kind of like, what does 1 Peter do and how do we live as a result of what 1 Peter is saying? What different angle are you taking compared to how I've kind of approached what we're talking about?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of the exegetical point is that I'm largely focusing on is just that first verse, that he's writing to God's elect exiles. And so what does that mean? And again, this is part of the application then, application now, is who are the people that he's writing to? Like what's his framework for understanding the audience that he's speaking into? Yeah. And what is it that makes them elect exiles? So the elect we've talked about, so that foreknowledge of God, chosen before God, through the sanctifying work of the Spirit to be obedient to Jesus Christ. So that's where the elect comes from. And there's a lot of confidence in that. So we can be, he goes on to talk about, we can be confident in our inheritance, like you said, because of the faithfulness of God in already resurrecting Jesus.
Yeah.
So this is where it ties back into resurrection again. Because Jesus was resurrected, God was faithful to the promises he had to Christ to resurrect him from the dead. And therefore, of course, he is going to be faithful to our own resurrection and eternity, which includes that inheritance as well. So we can be confident of our inheritance because God was faithful to his own resurrection of his own son.
Thank you for giving me another point.
Oh, that's right. I mean, again, there's always, this is the trick with preaching, there's always far more ideas than you can ever put into one 20, 25 minute sermon. So that's really key. The question I've got about the holistic sort of cultural picture is, what does it mean to be exiles? So who are these? Why are they exiles? What is it that makes them exiles? And I read a few different commentaries and they kind of batted ideas around. Some of them thought, well, he might be writing to Jewish people who were living in Gentile country, so that must make them exiles. It could be people who have migrated there and so they don't feel at home there. Neither of those have been particularly convincing to me. The one that's been particularly convincing to me is the idea that they're not exiles because they are racially distinct, geographically distinct, migrantly distinct. They're exiles because of their conversion to Christianity.
Yeah.
So what makes them different is they are otherwise at home in these cities of Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia, these regions. They're locals, they're natives, they fully belong to these places except for their new confession of Christ as Lord. And that's what makes them exiles. And so this idea that they are strangers in their own homeland, that they have been born again into a living hope, which makes them a foreigner in the land of one's birth. So that's a quote from one of the books I've been reading. And so this idea that they are exiles, they're foreigners, they're like aliens, strangers, these are all ways that we can translate this word, because of their faith in Jesus. It actually changes their identity, it changes their citizenship, it changes where they most truly belong. And it is not to their native country anymore. So they are exiles in, I guess, a metaphoric sense, in a spiritual sense. So this is not truly their home, and therefore this the antagonism that they're feeling, the suffering that they're experiencing, the hardships that they're facing, which he'll go on to explain a lot, makes sense. Of course you're feeling frustrated. Of course you've got even persecution and suffering. Of course you don't feel at home anymore in this space, because in a very real sense, you are aliens, you're strangers, you're exiles in this place. So you were born here, you know this place like the back of your hand, and yet you now feel strange in this space. So that's kind of the application then. The question that a few people have posed, and I'm playing around with, is this idea of, should Christians in the 21st century West, particularly for us in 21st century Sydney, should we expect to have suffering and feel like exiles in the same way that Peter's original audience felt like exiles? So this is now that move from application then to application now, and thinking about what has changed. How does that distance in time and geography shape the way that we apply Peter's response now? And ought we to expect suffering to the extent that Peter's original audience was experiencing suffering? And so I want to kind of play into that a little bit and think about what ought to we expect as Christians in 21st century Sydney. Should we feel like aliens and strangers in our own land? Is that the right response? Should we be seeking that? Should we not seek it but expect it? What does it actually look like to do that? And then there's a few ideas that are going around in my mind about this. So one is that in some ways, I think the majority of Christians in the West and in Sydney do not feel strange, do not feel like exiles, aliens. They don't feel weird. And in the different things I've been reading, there's kind of like two ways to take this, which I think are both true in my nuanced, complex thinking. One is that you've got the whole Tom Holland Dominion thesis of, because Christianity became the dominant paradigm in the West, and because we came through Christendom, therefore the strangeness of Christians living in the Roman Empire in 80 AD is very different to Christians living in a post-Christendom West in 2025 AD. So they are vastly different to each other because of the rise and ascendancy of Christianity as the dominant Western thinking. So all of these things that Tom Holland talks about in Dominion there is a certain sense we're not going to feel as strange, and we're not going to feel as exiled as those, because the overlap between being a good Christian and being a good member of Australia has a high degree of overlap than being a good Christian and being a good Roman citizen. There was not much overlap between those two things. And so there is a sense where we won't experience as much alienation in the world. However, on the other side, there is also those who will critique our lack of suffering and our lack of exile, because maybe we're not being hardcore enough. So maybe we've actually capitulated too much to the 21st century Australian dream. Maybe Christians are more interested in having a good lifestyle, having a good superannuation package, having the house and the holidays,
the
good inheritance. Yeah. We trust more in this is a line from one of the things I read, we trust more in our insurance and our superannuation premium than we do in trusting in the hope of Jesus. Where is it? Oh, shielded by God's power.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, actually, most of us in the West are shielded by our insurance policies and our superannuation than we are shielded by God's power. And so I think that there is a helpful critique to say, well, hold on, have we actually thought seriously about how a Christian ought to live against some of the assumptions of the modern 21st century world? Now, we don't define Christianity by being opposite to the world. So it's not if the world does this, then therefore I must do the exact opposite. That's not how you define Christianity. But maybe we should expect more to dig deep into the discipleship of Jesus, dig deep into the ethic of the kingdom, and realise that actually there are some ways that we've assumed are fine that may not be fine. I don't know. But I kind of want to play around a little bit with those ideas. And so I think it's both of these things. I think, yes, we feel less isolation and alienation because of the dominance of Christianity in the West. And so there's a lack of strangeness there. And perhaps we don't experience as much suffering and alienation because we don't take the discipleship of Jesus seriously enough. And I think one of the things I want to play around with a lot in this series is those ideas and thinking about, okay, well, so what does it actually mean to live in the 21st century? And then sort of the third bit to sort of add on to that is the fact that we are now living in post-Christendom, and that overlap between being a good Westerner and being a good Christian is pulling apart. So secularization has pulled those things apart, and it is increasingly weird to believe that there's a creator God, to believe that the Lord of all things is my friend, but I'm going to trust him and follow him, and therefore have thoughts, beliefs, patterns and practices to my life which are contrary to the world. And I think we seem to be living in a time where those things are pulling apart. And so I'm really excited by looking at 1 Peter this season, because I think we get to explore some of these ideas of what does it actually mean to live Christianly in a world which is possibly increasingly hostile, increasingly different, and in which we will increasingly feel alienated from if it continues in the trajectory that it appears to be in some circles. So there's some of the ideas that I'm playing around with. So as I said, I'm more of a big picture view of what's going on with us, what's going on with Peter, what's going on with this idea of alienation, and how do we think about that, hoping to set us up for the rest of the series.
Yep, and it's why we've entitled it Living Well on the Way Home.
Living Well on the Way Home, yes.
I thought it was fun.
Yeah.
But there's a lot in there.
There's lots of stuff, yeah.
Well, it's an interesting examination of what God's word is, that there is so much in it that we can't unpack it all in a sermon. But even now we can't unpack it all too. Like how does it impact us and what does it mean? And I think that, again, that's another beauty of actually having time set aside to actually study it in order to communicate it.
Yep.
Is that I grow in greater knowledge and understanding, which I think is, we talk about process. I think this has been the most enjoyable part of the process, is that you talked about writing your book and finding it hard to get the time. It's a good process to be part of, for your own sanctification and your own understanding in order to keep moving forward and being in that obedience that Peter wants you to be in.
Yeah. And I guess part of our role as pastors is to think, how do we draw more and more people into this process and thinking? And I mean, there's a certain sense where we are the leadership, and there's an appropriateness of the leaders, being the ones who are teaching and spending time in God's word and bringing it to bear on the life of the church. But most of the people in our churches are capable of reading and thinking a bit more on these things, and they probably do. And so how do we utilize the best use of our community groups? And people can go back in the podcast feed and find out our talking about community groups. How do we use the best times of our dinners? How do we use during the week? How do we use Bible reading plans? These kinds of things to just keep growing people in this, so that we've spent hours and hours and hours thinking about these things, and that's right and proper because that's the responsibility we've been given as pastors of the church. But how do they spend more than just the 20 minutes listening to us? How do they spend more time during the week? Because we want them to be thinking like this. We want all Christians to be as really well equipped to live, as Peter will say later, good lives among the pagans. Though they accuse us of doing wrong, they may praise God in heaven. And so, and again later in the book, that people will be prepared to give an answer for the hope that they have. And so that's going to be part of it as well. If we are living alienated lives, like there's actually a distinctive difference between the Christian and the average Australian, that will raise questions, and people will come to the average Joe Christian in the street, in the shops, in the workplace, and go, "You're different. You don't act like the average Australian," in a way that's kind of intriguing and kind of interesting. I think I like, but I'm not sure why. Can you tell me more about that? Now, very rarely the conversation will be exactly like that, but that's what living an alienated life looks like.
Yeah,
it's so distinctive and so different that it might be suffering inducing, because you might actually suffer for following Jesus. You might not get the same promotions, job opportunities, study opportunities, holidaying opportunities, purchasing opportunities. Like there's a whole lot of things that you will forego because you're following Jesus rather than following the patterns and practices of this world. It may also bring out a lot of really exciting opportunities to tell of the hope that you have, and to do that with gentleness and respect. So I think they're the kind of the big picture things that I'm kind of thinking of as we get into this series.
No, I love it. I think that's right. It's encouraging people to think more deeply about it so that you may give an answer for the hope that you have. I think that's a really good way to finish it up. And I appreciate your time and your efforts, and your discussion.
Yeah, and if you are listening to this, then you probably also have access already to Joel's sermon. So you can feedback either under that YouTube video or under this YouTube video of what you thought.
Yes, you definitely can. So thank you for highlighting that. I was about to do that, but you did it already.
Yeah.
Well done. And if not, you can just email me, joel@shockabsorber.com.au. You can let me know what you think, or what you think we did wrong, or what we could maybe improve on.
And if you didn't hear mine, too bad. Because it doesn't get recorded.
Yeah, it won't be recorded, but you can come to church here next time Tim preaches on 1 Peter. I will not be doing so. But thank you for everyone that's been listening and or watching. We really appreciate it. And thank you again to Tim.
Thank you, Joel.
As always. And we always finish with a one way.
One way.
One way.